Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Brushes and Bunnies, and this is going to be episode 2 of the Watercolor for Beginners series. In this episode, I'm going to be giving you some important information for what you need to know when you're going to be setting up your first watercolor palette. So let's get started with the very first tip. Whether you buy watercolor tubes or watercolor pans, this is totally up to you. It all comes down to personal preference. No matter if you select a tube or a pen, you will still need to buy a case or a palette to store the paint in. There are many different types of palettes that you can buy at your local art store. If you decided to invest in watercolor pans, you can buy a specific case that will hold these pans, such as this one. If you're investing in watercolor tubes, you can then buy these specific palettes that you can put your paint on. They come in different varieties of material, for example, metal, plastic, and even porcelain. The only problem with these palettes is that they're wide open, so after use you'll need to actually store it or cover it in a way so that the dust and the hair does not go on your paint. Another way to avoid this is just to buy a palette that contains a cover. Although these can be a little bit more expensive, I think that it is definitely worth it. Before dropping lots of money on a new paint set or individual colors, you kind of need to know what you're looking for. At the very beginning of starting with watercolors, I just went to the art store and I went ahead and took a Schmincke and I just bought the colors that I thought I would love and use, and I created this really hideous palette that makes absolutely no sense. The easiest way to learn how to understand what you're looking for is just to break down the information that is already available on the brochure, pamphlet, or even on the tube. You have the price category, you have the brand name, you have the tube size, you have the color name and swatch, and most importantly, you have the degree of light fastness and the degree of transparency. Light fastness refers to a watercolor property, and this property basically lets us know how resistant the watercolor color or paint is to light. The degree of transparency is a classification for transparency and opaque paints. You usually have 4 different icons on the tube for transparent, semi-transparent, semi-opaque, and opaque. Now on the flip side of the tube, you do have more information. Once again, you have the color name and color number that pertains to the brand itself, in this case Shinhanart. Perhaps the most important piece of information here is the color index name. The color index is a universal system that is used across the art world, and basically what it does is that it assigns a unique code to each pigment. Let's say I want to look for this permanent violet color in a different brand. Shinhanart names it permanent violet, while another brand may not have it named as permanent violet. If I want to look for the similar pigment, all I need to do is use the pigment code or the code index that is available on the label. In this case, it is PV3. And I can Google online and search for this pigment name. If it's available, then I can use that and go to the art store and find a similar pigment name on different brands, or I can just use the code because most watercolor brands will have this code index available on the label. So this is a super useful tip if you're searching for the same pigment color in a different brand. Theoretically, you should be able to create every single color using 3 primary colors of red, yellow, and blue. But of course, that's not really efficient or time-saving, so it is suggested that you do create your own 12-color palette that includes both warm and cool versions of the 3 primary colors of red, yellow, and blue. Now, this 12-color palette is just a suggestion based on what I've learned over the years and also based on the research that I did find over the internet. You can feel free to use your own colors, take some out, add some new ones, it's all up to you, but just keep in mind that you should have a basic palette to start off with. The palette that I'm creating for my new watercolor box basically consists of a lemon yellow for a cool yellow, a permanent yellow deep for a warm yellow, a permanent red for a cool red, a rose madder for a warm red, crimson lake for a violet red, cerulean blue hue for a cool blue, cobalt blue hue for a warm blue, sap green for a cool green, hooker's green for a warm green, yellow ochre for a cool earth tone, burnt sienna for a warm earth tone, and indigo blue for a very, very dark tone that is not black. In addition to this palette, I've added a burnt umber, a black gouache, and a white gouache because I love working with gouache as well with watercolor, and later on I'll most likely be adding some purple colors to the palette itself. Now that you've got your paints, it's time to organize your palette. I don't believe there's one proper way of organizing your paints on your palette. In my case, I decided to organize it based on the colors that I use primarily for skin tones, and also in that case, I did organize them based on color. For example, in this very first tray, I wanted it to be focused primarily on skin tones, so I did add the red colors, the yellows, the earth tones, and also a bit of the blues together in one tray. These are the colors that I primarily use to create skin tones of all different variations, light skin tones and also darker skin tones, so having all these colors together in one tray was super useful. I didn't want to add too many colors on this tray because I do require a lot of space to mix the colors, so the rest of the tray, for example in the middle and on the left side, goes primarily for the actual mixing process. If I require any other colors, for example adding a purple or a green to the mix, I can always just use this from a different tray and add the color myself from tray to tray, if that makes sense. I again just want to point out that there's no correct way of doing this. Whatever works best for you, how you work, that is the way that you should do it. In addition to the watercolor paints, I did add the white gouache and the black gouache in the larger kind of cubbies up above. I do use a lot of this in my work also, so it's good just to have its own little area where I can have large amounts of the paint. Now please note, of course, it shouldn't be said, but I'm gonna say it anyways, that any like watercolor or gouache can be reactivated by just simply putting water. So although the paint looks fresh and nice right now in the video, it will dry out, but don't worry, you can just add and reactivate it with water. That goes for both gouache and watercolor. The last point I want to touch base on is color swatching your palette. This is super important and very easy to do, and it basically provides you a lot of really important information, such as the way that your colors look like in your palette and how they apply on watercolor paper. If you have more than one brand, it is advised to just basically put the brand name on the watercolor paper before getting started, and then you can add all of your colors to your 12 color palette directly on the paper itself. You can then add your swatches directly on the paper for each and every color of your palette. Something that I do like to do is have a nice gradient effect, so I show how the color reacts when it's very dark to very light with a lot of water. This just really gives me a good understanding for later down the road when I am using these colors to do a portrait. Then I can see exactly how dark it can go, and if I need to mix it with another color to get a specific shade, for example. Another thing that's really important is actually to put the color name directly under the swatches. You can either do the color name or also combine it together with the color index code. So if you want to have this color in a different brand, you have the code directly there without having to look on your watercolor tubes and try to find the code on the label. It's already on the actual swatch. Another really fun exercise to do if you're a beginner is to just start blending and mixing in these colors of your palette together. For example, I am just trying to see what I can use to create a skin tone, and I'm just trying different variations, adding a little bit more red, adding a little bit more yellow ochre, for example, trying to see what happens. And I basically document it all on a watercolor paper, and then afterwards I could actually write the colors that I used, the combinations that created this color. And this is so helpful, especially down the road when you actually are creating portraits. Then you have everything there, you know exactly what colors you need to use to create that specific skin tone. And this is something that I could definitely recommend doing and playing around at the very beginning of, starting your watercolor journey. That is everything for episode 2. I hope you did enjoy it. Please let me know down below in the comments if this has helped you, if the info is good and you learned something new. I would love to get your feedback on this. Episode 3 will be coming very shortly. We will be focusing on different watercolor techniques that you can do. As always, check out my social media links, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, which I am now trying to actively be on. So if you want to follow me there, check out my Twitter down below in the video description. As always, stay awesome, keep drawing, keep painting, and don't ever give up. And we will see each other next week. Bye!